I had always imagined my 57th birthday as a day of quiet celebration, surrounded by the people I loved most. My son Ryan, his wife Sophie, and my two beautiful grandchildren, Emma and Lucas. Life had become increasingly difficult over the past year, with tension building between Ryan and me. But I held on to the hope that this day might be a turning point, a chance for us to mend the cracks that had formed in our relationship. The morning started with cautious optimism. I spent the early hours tidying up the house, hanging a few decorations, and humming to myself as I prepared Ryan's favorite lasagna. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air, bringing back memories of when he was a boy, and I would make this dish for him after his soccer games. I even picked up a cake from the bakery down the street, the same bakery where I'd gotten his birthday cakes every year since he was 5. The familiar weight of the cake box in my hands brought a smile to my face. Surely this would remind him of the bond we shared, the years of love and dedication I had poured into raising him. By noon, everything was ready. The table was set with my best china, the lasagna was bubbling away in the oven, and the cake sat proudly on the counter. I glanced at the clock, nervous anticipation fluttering in my stomach. I hadn't heard from Ryan in a few days, but when I called him earlier, he had surprised me by agreeing to come over for dinner with Sophie and the kids. His voice had been guarded, and I could hear Sophie in the background, her voice low and insistent. Still, he had agreed, and that was all that mattered. As 6:00 p.m. approached, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, smoothing down my dress and adjusting the strand of pearls Ryan had given me years ago. I wanted to look my best, to show him that I was still the mother who had loved him fiercely, even if things had changed between us. When the doorbell finally rang, I practically ran to answer it, a huge smile on my face. But the moment I opened the door, my heart sank. Ryan stood there, his face a mask of irritation and something else, something colder, harder. He wasn't alone. Sophie was beside him, her lips curled into a sneer, and the kids were nowhere to be seen. "Where are Emma and Lucas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, though unease was already creeping into my chest. Sophie stepped forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "We decided it was best they didn't come tonight. Wouldn't want them exposed to any more of your toxic influence." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Toxic? Me? I had sacrificed everything for Ryan, raising him alone after his father left, working 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed. I had been there for every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every heartbreak. And now this woman, this intruder, was accusing me of being toxic. I turned to Ryan, silently begging him to refute Sophie's words, to defend me. But he just stood there, his arms crossed, his eyes avoiding mine. The weight of his silence was crushing. "Ryan?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" He finally met my gaze, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. There was no warmth there, no love, only disdain. "This has gone on long enough, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "You need to leave." The words didn't register at first. "Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home." "Not anymore," Sophie interjected, stepping closer until she was practically in my face. "Ryan and I have decided that it's time for you to move out. You've overstayed your welcome." I stared at her, incredulous. "Move out? You can't be serious." "Ryan, this is our home. Your home. I raised you here." But Ryan's expression didn't waver. "It's my house now, Mom. I've paid off the mortgage, and I'm the one paying the bills. You're just living here rent-free, and honestly, it's time you moved on." The shock of his words left me speechless. I had never felt so blindsided, so betrayed. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. All the memories, all the love and care I had poured into this house, into Ryan, it meant nothing to him. And it was clear that Sophie was behind this, pulling the strings, turning my son against me. Desperation clawed at my throat. "Ryan, please, don't do this. I'm your mother. I've always been there for you. Can't we talk about this?" But Ryan just shook his head, his expression hardening further. "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. You need to go." I felt a sob rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down, refusing to break in front of them. Where am I supposed to go, Ryan? I have nowhere else. Sophie's smirk grew wider, and she leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. That's not our problem, is it? You should have thought about that before you decided to meddle in our lives. Before I could respond, Ryan reached out and shoved me backward. The force of it sent me stumbling, and I barely caught myself on the doorframe. I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision, searching for any sign of the boy I had raised, the boy who used to run to me for comfort. But he was gone, replaced by this cold, unrecognizable man. Get out, he said again, his voice final, and don't come back. I stood there, frozen, as they turned their backs on me and walked away, Sophie's laughter echoing in my ears. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating through the empty house, through my empty heart. Numbly, I walked down the front steps and onto the sidewalk, the evening air biting at my skin. I didn't know where to go, what to do. I had no one, no family, no friends nearby. My only child had just thrown me out like garbage, on my birthday no less. The irony was bitter. I collapsed onto the curb, the tears finally spilling over. My body shook with sobs, but no sound came out. It was as if the betrayal had stolen my voice, my will to fight. I had spent my entire life loving Ryan, giving him everything I had, and this was my reward, cast aside like yesterday's trash. As the night grew darker, cars passed by without slowing, their headlights washing over me. A lone figure huddled on the cold, hard pavement. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, utterly alone. And in that moment, I realized that the son I had once known, the son I had loved with all my heart, was gone forever. I couldn't stay there, not like this. Somehow, I had to pick myself up, figure out what to do next. But as I sat there, the tears streaming down my face, all I could think was that my life as I knew it was over. Everything I had worked for, everything I had loved was gone, and I had no idea how to get it back. But as I wiped my tears away, a small, fierce ember of determination ignited within me. If Sophie thought she could take my son from me, destroy my life, and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I vowed then and there that I would find a way to make her pay. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I awoke in a bed that wasn't mine, surrounded by an unfamiliar stillness. It took me a moment to remember where I was, Grace's guest room. The events of the previous night came rushing back, hitting me like a freight train. Ryan's cold eyes, Sophie's venomous smirk, the sheer finality of being thrown out of the home I had built. My heart clenched with a fresh wave of grief. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the soft pastel walls. It was a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. I had no appetite, but the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the kitchen called to me, offering a semblance of normalcy in an otherwise shattered world. I pushed myself out of bed, the weariness in my bones a reminder of my age, and the weight of the betrayal I was still struggling to comprehend. As I padded down the hallway, the sound of clinking dishes and soft humming grew louder. I paused for a moment outside the kitchen door, taking a deep breath. I knew Grace would be there, ready with her unwavering support, but I also knew that facing her meant confronting the reality of my situation. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, Grace looked up from the stove, her face immediately softening into an expression of concern. She had always been the calm in the storm, a steady rock in my life. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her eyes, those piercing, intelligent eyes, were filled with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Morning, Linda," she said gently, setting down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table. "Come sit. You need to eat something." I managed a small smile, grateful for her kindness, even though food was the last thing on my mind. "Thanks, Grace. You didn't have to go through all this trouble." "Nonsense," she replied, waving off my words as she poured me a cup of coffee. "You're my best friend, Linda. I'd do anything for you." I sat down at the table, the warmth of the coffee cup comforting against my cold hands. But as I took a sip, the memories of last night flooded back, making the liquid taste bitter. Grace sat across from me, watching me closely, her brow furrowed with worry. Linda, she began softly, I know you're hurting, and I can't even begin to imagine what you're going through. But you need to know that you're not alone in this. I nodded, unable to meet her gaze, my eyes fixated on the swirling coffee in my cup. It just feels so surreal, Grace. I never thought Ryan would. I never thought he'd turn on me like that. And on my birthday, of all days. Grace reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, steadying. I know, but this isn't your fault, Linda. Sophie's poisoned his mind against you. And that woman, there's something off about her. I've always felt it. I looked up at Grace, my heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and anger. She's taken everything from me, Grace. My son, my grandchildren, my home. And the worst part is, Ryan just let her do it. He chose her over his own mother. Grace's eyes narrowed, a spark of fire igniting in their depths. Sophie's manipulative, Linda. She knows exactly how to twist Ryan around her little finger, and she's been doing it for years. But we're not going to let her get away with this. I frowned, not entirely understanding where Grace was going with this. What do you mean? What can I do? Ryan's made his choice. Grace's grip on my hand tightened slightly, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. Just because Ryan's chosen her doesn't mean you have to accept it. You've spent your whole life taking care of him, loving him, sacrificing for him. You don't deserve to be tossed aside like this. Sophie has taken everything from you, and it's time she faced the consequences of her actions. A chill ran down my spine at the determination in Grace's voice. Consequences? Grace, what are you suggesting? She leaned in closer, her voice firm and unwavering. I'm saying it's time to fight back, Linda. You've always been the kind, loving mother, but there comes a point when you have to stand up for yourself. We need to find a way to show Sophie that she can't just waltz into your life and destroy everything you've built. I shook my head, overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of what she was suggesting. I don't know, Grace. I'm not like that. I don't even know where to start. Grace's eyes softened, but there was still a steely resolve behind them. You don't have to do it alone. I've got someone who can help, my brother Mark. He's got connections, and he knows how to dig up dirt on people. If Sophie has any skeletons in her closet, Mark will find them. And once we have something on her, we'll use it to make her back off. The idea of digging into Sophie's past sent a thrill of unease through me. It felt wrong, like I was stooping to her level. But at the same time, there was a spark of something else, something darker. Could it be hope? Could I really take control of this situation, force Sophie to see the damage she had caused, and maybe, just maybe, get my son back? I stared into Grace's determined eyes, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Do you really think this could work? Grace squeezed my hand, her smile both comforting and slightly dangerous. I know it can. Sophie's not as perfect as she pretends to be, Linda. No one is. And once we have something on her, we'll see how she handles the tables being turned. I hesitated, my thoughts racing. This was a side of Grace I hadn't seen before, a side that was fiercely protective and more than a little vengeful. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe this was exactly what I needed. Sophie had taken everything from me, and she had done it without a second thought. If there was a way to make her pay, to make her see that she couldn't just destroy my life and get away with it, then maybe it was worth a shot. Okay, I said finally, my voice firmer than I expected. Let's do it. Let's see what Mark can find. Grace's smile widened, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. That's the spirit, Linda. We'll make her regret ever crossing you. As Grace stood up to clear the dishes, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling within me. Fear, excitement, and a deep-seated anger that had been simmering since the moment Ryan had shoved me out of my own home. I wasn't a vindictive person by nature, but this situation had pushed me to my breaking point. Sophie had turned my son against me, stolen my family, and left me with nothing. If there was a way to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, then I was ready to take it. Later that day, Grace called Mark and arranged for us to meet him. As we drove to his office, the gravity of what I was about to do settled in. This wasn't just a small confrontation or a petty argument. This was a plan to expose someone, to unravel the life of the woman who had torn my world apart. It felt dangerous, risky, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was necessary. When we arrived at Mark's office, my heart pounded in my chest. I had met Mark a few times before, mostly at family gatherings, but I had never really known him well. He was a private person, someone who kept to himself, but Grace had always spoken highly of him. As we walked into his office, I was struck by the no-nonsense atmosphere. Dark wood furniture, minimal decorations, and a single framed photograph of Mark and Grace as children on his desk. Mark greeted us with a firm handshake, his eyes sharp and assessing as he looked at me. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a rugged handsomeness that hinted at a life lived on the edge. There was something about him that exuded confidence and competence, and it reassured me that Grace had brought me to the right person. "Linda," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Grace has told me what happened. I'm sorry you're going through this." "Thank you, Mark," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. It's been hard. I never imagined Ryan would do something like this. Mark nodded, his expression sympathetic. People change, especially when they're under the influence of someone else. But that doesn't mean you have to accept it. I glanced at Grace, who gave me an encouraging nod. Grace mentioned you could help, that you could find out if Suffy has any secrets. Mark leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he considered my words. Everyone has secrets, Linda. Some are just better at hiding them than others. If Suffy has something to hide, I'll find it. But you need to be sure this is what you want. Once we go down this path, there's no turning back. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. But as I thought of Sophie's smug face, of the way she had laughed as Ryan threw me out of my own home, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not without a fight. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "Let's do this." Mark nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "All right then, I'll start digging. It might take some time, but I'll find something." As we left Mark's office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Nervousness, anticipation, and a simmering anger that I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel until now. This wasn't just about getting back at Sophie. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. For too long, I had been the passive victim, the one who endured the slights and the betrayals without fighting back. But no more. Sophie had started this war, but I was determined to finish it. The days following our meeting with Mark felt like an eternity. Each morning I woke up with a knot in my stomach, a mixture of fear and anticipation gnawing at my insides. Grace was a constant presence, offering words of encouragement and reassurance, but I could sense the underlying tension between us. Both of us waiting for the moment when Mark would deliver the news that could change everything. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that the call finally came. I was sitting in Grace's living room, absent-mindedly staring out the window at the droplets racing down the glass, when the phone rang. Grace answered it, her expression instantly shifting from casual to intense as she listened to the voice on the other end. "It's Mark," she said, her tone clipped as she handed the phone to me. My heart skipped a beat as I took the receiver. "Linda," Mark's voice came through the line, steady and calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "I found something. We need to meet." My hand tightened around the phone, a rush of adrenaline surging through me. "What did you find?" "I'd rather discuss it in person," Mark replied. "Can you meet me at my office in an hour?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I turned to Grace, who was already grabbing her keys. "This is it," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and determination. "We're finally going to get something on Sophie." The drive to Mark's office was tense, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The rain had intensified, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass, or perhaps for the storm to begin. When we arrived, Mark greeted us at the door, ushering us inside with a sense of urgency that made my pulse quicken. His office was dimly lit, the sound of rain tapping against the windows adding to the atmosphere of suspense. He gestured for us to sit down, and I noticed a manila folder sitting on his desk. thick with documents, the edges slightly worn from handling. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Mark began, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, his expression grave. "What I've found is serious, far more serious than I initially expected." Grace and I exchanged a glance, the tension between us palpable. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark opened the folder, spreading out a series of documents and photographs. The first was a mugshot. A younger but unmistakable Sophie. Her cold eyes stared back at me from the grainy image, a smirk playing on her lips, as if she knew something no one else did. "This is Sophie about 10 years ago," Mark explained, tapping the photo. "She was arrested for embezzlement at the company she worked for. She managed to avoid jail time, but the charges were serious. She used her charm to manipulate her way out of the worst of it, but it was a close call." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the mugshot, the reality of Sophie's past sinking in. Embezzlement? She's a thief. Mark nodded grimly. "And that's not all. I did some more digging and found out that she was also involved with a man named Mark Thompson, a wealthy businessman she dated for a few years before his sudden death." Grace frowned, leaning forward. "Sudden death? What happened?" Mark's eyes darkened as he pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Suspicious Death of Local Businessman Leaves Questions Unanswered." Beneath it was a photo of Sophie and Mark Thompson, smiling at a charity event. They looked like the perfect couple, except now I knew it was all a facade. "Mark Thompson died of an apparent overdose," Mark explained, his voice low. "But the circumstances were highly suspicious. The police suspected foul play, but they couldn't prove anything. Sophie was the last person to see him alive, and there were rumors that she had something to do with his death." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I read the article. Phrases like ongoing investigation and person of interest jumped out at me, making my heart pound in my chest. Sophie had been involved in a man's death, and somehow she had slipped through the cracks of the justice system. "This woman," I murmured, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "She's dangerous." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "She's more than dangerous, Linda. She's a master manipulator, and she's gotten away with too much for too long. But now, we have the power to stop her." I swallowed hard, the weight of what he was saying pressing down on me. This wasn't just about exposing Sophie's secrets. This was about bringing a criminal to justice. And if Sophie had been capable of embezzlement, and possibly even murder, what else was she capable of? What had she planned for Ryan? For my grandchildren? "What do we do now?" Grace asked, her voice filled with the same determination that I could feel bubbling up inside me. Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing with focus. "We have a few options. The first is to confront Sophie directly, let her know that we have this information. If she's smart, she'll realize that we could destroy her life with this and might be willing to back off, maybe even convince Ryan to reconcile with you." I considered the idea, my mind racing. The thought of facing Sophie, of seeing her cold, calculating eyes fill with fear, was tempting. But something about it felt too easy. Sophie wasn't the type to back down without a fight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that confronting her head-on might provoke her into something even more dangerous. "And the second option?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil within me. "The second option," Mark said, his tone measured, "is to go straight to the police. Reopen the investigation into Mark Thompson's death and bring Sophie to justice once and for all. It's a riskier move, and it could take time, but it might be the only way to truly end this." The room fell silent as we weighed the options. The idea of going to the police, of dragging Sophie's name through the mud, and exposing her for what she really was, held a certain appeal. But at the same time, it was terrifying. The ramifications for Ryan, for my grandchildren. What would happen to them if Sophie was arrested? If Ryan was left to pick up the pieces of his life without her? Grace broke the silence, her voice firm. "Linda, whatever you choose, we'll support you. But you need to think about what's best for you, for your future. Sophie has already taken so much from you. Don't let her take anything else." I nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for Grace and Mark's support, but the decision weighed heavily on me. This wasn't just about me. This was about my family, about doing what was right, even if it was difficult. I need to think, I said finally, my voice quiet but resolute. This is a big decision, and I need to make sure I'm doing what's right, for everyone. Mark nodded in understanding. Take your time, Linda. But remember, whatever you choose, we're here for you. As we left Mark's office, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the dark clouds still hanging low in the sky. The world felt heavy, burdened by the secrets we had uncovered and the decisions that lay ahead. Grace and I walked in silence, both of us lost in thought as we made our way back to the car. As I settled into the passenger seat, my mind raced with possibilities. Confronting Sophie, going to the police. Either way, there was no turning back. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let Sophie get away with what she had done. Not to me, not to Ryan, not to Mark Thompson. She had destroyed enough lives, and it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as the storm outside raged on. My thoughts were a whirlwind, the decision looming over me like a dark cloud. But as the hours ticked by, a sense of clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just about getting revenge. This was about justice. About protecting my family from a woman who had already proven she was capable of anything. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I had made my decision. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed Mark's number. "It's Linda," I said when he answered, my voice steady with resolve. "I've made my choice. Let's take this to the police." There was a pause on the other end, and then Mark's voice came through, filled with approval and determination. "Good choice, Linda. We'll make sure Sophie pays for what she's done." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The decision had been made, and now there was no going back. Sophie had started this war, but I was going to finish it. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Ryan, for my grandchildren, and for every other person Sophie had ever hurt. The storm outside had passed, but I knew the real storm was just beginning. And this time, I was ready for it. I spent the next few days in a state of anxious anticipation, knowing that the confrontation with Sophie was inevitable. After deciding to take the information we had to the police, Mark had begun the process of gathering everything into a solid case. But before we could go to the authorities, we agreed it was necessary to confront Sophie directly. There was a chance, albeit a slim one, that she might fold under the pressure and agree to back off before things escalated further. But something in my gut told me Sophie wasn't the type to fold. She was a woman who thrived on manipulation and control, and people like her didn't give up their power easily. The morning of the confrontation, I woke up feeling a strange mixture of dread and determination. Grace was already up, her face set in a mask of calm resolve as she sipped her coffee at the kitchen table. She had always been my rock, but today there was a fierceness in her eyes that made me realize she was just as invested in this as I was. "You ready?" she asked, her voice steady, but I could see the tension in the way she held her coffee cup, her knuckles white from the grip. I nodded, trying to push down the nervous flutter in my stomach. "As ready as I'll ever be." We drove in silence to the meeting place, an upscale cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where people like Sophie felt at home. Mark had chosen it deliberately, knowing it was a place where Sophie would feel comfortable, perhaps even overconfident. The cafe was quiet, with soft music playing in the background and the clinking of china as the waitstaff moved about, serving the few patrons who lingered over their morning lattes. As we walked in, I spotted Sophie immediately. She was seated at a corner table, dressed in a chic black blazer and pencil skirt, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked every bit the successful, put-together woman she portrayed herself to be. But I knew the truth now, and that knowledge gave me the strength to walk up to her with my head held high. Sophie looked up as we approached, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. "Linda," she said, her tone cool and condescending. "Grace, what a surprise. I didn't expect to see you two here." I exchanged a glance with Grace, who gave me a reassuring nod. I took a deep breath and sat down across from Sophie, my heart pounding in my chest, but my voice steady. "We need to talk, Sophie." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. About what? If this is another one of your attempts to manipulate Ryan, you can save your breath. Grace bristled beside me, but I placed a hand on her arm, signaling her to stay calm. This was my fight, and I needed to see it through. This isn't about manipulation, Sophie, I said, locking eyes with her. This is about the truth, about who you really are. For a split second, I saw a flicker of something in Sophie's eyes. Fear, maybe, or perhaps just the realization that this wasn't going to be a typical confrontation. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by her usual cold, calculating gaze. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice smooth and unaffected. But if you're here to make baseless accusations, you're wasting your time. Mark, who had been standing just behind us, stepped forward and placed a thick envelope on the table. I think you'll find these accusations are anything but baseless. Sophie's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the envelope, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. And what exactly is this supposed to be? Mark didn't flinch. This is everything we found on you, Sophie. Your criminal record, your involvement in the embezzlement scandal, and the details of your relationship with Mark Thompson. His death was suspicious, to say the least. Sophie's composure faltered for a brief moment. Her eyes flickered to the envelope, and I could see the gears turning in her mind as she calculated her next move. But she quickly regained her poise, offering Mark a dismissive smile. You think you can intimidate me with this? She scoffed. These are nothing but old rumors and baseless accusations. You can't prove anything. Mark didn't budge. Maybe. But I doubt the police will see it that way when we hand over this information. You may have managed to escape justice once, Sophie, but this time you won't be so lucky. The color drained from Sophie's face, her smile slipping as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, and it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. She wasn't as invincible as she wanted everyone to believe. So, what is this? Sophie snapped, her voice tight with anger. A blackmail attempt. You're going to threaten me with this unless I do what you want. Grace leaned forward, her expression hard as steel. We're not here to blackmail you, Sophie. We're here to give you a chance to do the right thing. Walk away from Ryan and the kids. Let him reconcile with his mother. If you do that, we'll keep this information to ourselves. Sophie's eyes blazed with fury, her mask of calm shattered. And if I don't? Then we go to the police, Mark said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. And they'll reopen the investigation into Mark Thompson's death. You'll be facing charges not just for the embezzlement, but for murder as well. Your entire life, your marriage, your reputation will be over. For a long moment, Sophie didn't say anything. She just stared at the envelope, her mind clearly racing as she tried to figure out how to get out of this. But the reality was sinking in, and I could see it in her eyes. She knew she was trapped. Finally, she looked up at me, her gaze cold and venomous. You think you can just destroy my life and get away with it? I'd met her glare with one of my own, the anger and hurt I had been holding onto for so long bubbling to the surface. You destroyed my life, Sophie. You took my son, my grandchildren, my home. And now you're going to pay for that. Sophie's lips curled into a sneer. You're making a mistake, Linda. If you go through with this, you'll lose Ryan for good. He'll never forgive you. The words stung, and for a moment, doubt crept into my mind. But then I remembered the coldness in Ryan's eyes when he had thrown me out, the way he had chosen Sophie over me without a second thought. I wasn't the one who had destroyed our relationship. Sophie was. And if I didn't do something to stop her, she would continue to tear apart everything I loved. I've already lost him, I said quietly, the pain evident in my voice. But I won't lose my self-respect. I won't let you get away with this. Sophie's eyes narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind, searching for a way out. But there was no escape, no easy way to wriggle out of the corner we had backed her into. Fine, she spat, the venom in her voice palpable. You win. I'll walk away. But don't think for a second that this is over. You've made a powerful enemy, Linda. And I promise you, you'll regret this. With that, she stood up, knocking her chair back as she did. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the cafe, leaving the envelope untouched on the table. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of triumph and fear swirling within me. Mark let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing. That went about as well as we could have hoped. Grace reached out and squeezed my hand, her expression softening. "You did great, Linda. She knows she's beaten." But as I sat there, watching the door swing shut behind Sophie, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Sophie wasn't the type to give up so easily, and I knew deep down that she would be back. And when she came back, she would come with everything she had. The rest of the day passed in a blur, the confrontation replaying in my mind over and over again. I kept expecting my phone to ring, for Ryan to call me, furious at what I had done. But the call never came. Instead, I was left with an uneasy silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a gnawing sense of dread. Sophie's parting words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder that this battle was far from over. But I knew I couldn't back down now. I had made my choice, and I had to see it through, no matter what came next. The confrontation had been a victory, but it had also set the stage for the next chapter of this war. Sophie would strike back. I was sure of it. And when she did, I had to be ready. But for now, I would take the small victory, the knowledge that I had stood up for myself, for my family, and that Sophie had finally seen that she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The game had changed, and now it was my turn to play. The days following the confrontation with Sophie were eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that clung to me, the feeling that Sophie was out there somewhere, plotting her next move. Grace and Mark tried to reassure me, telling me that we had done everything we could, that Sophie was cornered and had no choice but to back down. But I knew better. Sophie wasn't the kind of person who took defeat lightly, and her parting words echoed in my mind. "You'll regret this." It wasn't until the fourth day that the other shoe finally dropped. I was in the middle of preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat, a spike of anxiety coursing through me. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and made my way to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I opened it, I found Ryan standing on the front porch, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell did you do?" he snarled, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I stumbled back, taken aback by the intensity of his anger. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Mom," he snapped, whirling around to face me. His eyes were blazing with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. "Sophie told me everything. About you hiring a private investigator, about you trying to blackmail her." "What the hell were you thinking?" I felt a pang of guilt, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "I wasn't trying to blackmail her, Ryan. I was trying to protect you from her." Ryan let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Protect me? From what, Mom? From the woman I love? The mother of my children? You've completely lost it." I shook my head, desperation clawing at my throat. "No, Ryan, you don't understand. Sophie isn't who you think she is. She's dangerous. She's my wife," Ryan shouted, cutting me off. "And you've crossed a line, Mom. You've gone too far this time." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I had known this confrontation was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer venom in Ryan's voice. It was as if the son I had raised, the boy who had once adored me, had been replaced by a stranger. "Ryan, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Just listen to me. Sophie has a criminal record. She's been involved in—" "I don't care," Ryan shouted, his face red with anger. "I don't care about your so-called evidence. I don't care what your little investigator found. Sophie is my wife, and I trust her. You're just trying to tear us apart because you can't stand the fact that I chose her over you." The accusation cut deeper than I could have imagined. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. "That's not true, Ryan. I love you. I just want what's best for you." Ryan's expression twisted into one of disgust. "Well, you've got a funny way of showing it. You've ruined everything, Mom. Sophie's talking about leaving. about taking the kids and getting as far away from you as possible. And you know what? I don't blame her. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The thought of losing my grandchildren, of never seeing Emma and Lucas again, was more than I could bear. But the thought of Ryan, my only son, walking out of my life for good, it was a nightmare I couldn't escape. "Ryan," I whispered, my voice trembling, "please don't do this. Don't let her take you away from me." But Ryan's expression remained hard, unyielding. "You made this choice, Mom. You chose to dig up dirt on Sophie, to try and ruin her life. Well, now you're going to have to live with the consequences." He turned to leave, but I couldn't let him go. Not like this. I reached out, grabbing his arm, desperate to make him understand. "Ryan, wait. You don't know what she's capable of. She." But before I could finish, Ryan yanked his arm out of my grasp, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen in him before. "Don't touch me," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You've done enough damage. I'm done with you, Mom. I don't want to see you or hear from you ever again." The finality of his words hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the world tilting on its axis as the reality of what was happening sank in. Ryan was really leaving. He was walking out of my life, choosing Sophie over me, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. "Ryan, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Don't do this." But he was already gone, slamming the door behind him with a force that rattled the windows. The sound echoed through the house, a brutal punctuation mark on the end of our relationship. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I had known that confronting Sophie would come with risks, but I hadn't expected to lose everything. The pain was overwhelming, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. Eventually, I sank to the floor, sobs tearing through me as the reality of my situation washed over me. Ryan was gone. My son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved more than anything in this world, had chosen someone else over me. And there was nothing I could do to bring him back. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my grief. Time seemed to stretch and blur, the minutes bleeding into hours as the weight of my loss pressed down on me. But then, through the haze of my despair, I heard my phone ringing. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I didn't have the strength to talk to anyone, didn't have the energy to explain what had just happened. But then I thought of Grace and Mark, the only two people who had stood by me through all of this, and I forced myself to reach for the phone. "Hello?" My voice was thick with tears, barely recognizable. "Linda, it's Mark," came the steady voice on the other end. "Did it work? Did Ryan?" A bitter laugh escaped me, the sound hollow and broken. "No, Mark, it didn't work. Ryan's gone. He chose her over me." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the concern in Mark's voice when he spoke again. "I'm sorry, Linda. I know how much this hurts. But we can't stop now. We have to keep pushing forward." "What's the point?" I whispered, the despair overwhelming me. "I've already lost him. Nothing we do now will change that." "This isn't just about Ryan anymore," Mark said, his voice firm. "This is about justice. Sophie has hurt too many people, gotten away with too much. If we don't stop her, she'll just keep doing it." The mention of justice stirred something within me, something small, but fierce. I had started this fight to protect my family, to protect Ryan from the woman who had manipulated and lied her way into his life. And even though I had lost Ryan, I couldn't let Sophie win. Not after everything she had done. "What do we do next?" I asked, my voice steadying as the resolve began to take hold. "We take this to the police," Mark replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "We show them everything we've found, and we make sure Sophie faces the consequences of her actions." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, let's do it." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Mark and I gathered all the evidence we had on Sophie, organizing it into a neat package to present to the police. Grace was there every step of the way, offering words of encouragement and support, even as my resolve wavered. It was a grueling process, and every time I looked at the documents, I was reminded of the woman who had torn my life apart. Finally, the day arrived. Mark and I walked into the police station, our heads held high, ready to blow the lid off Sophie's carefully constructed facade. The detective we met with listened intently as we laid out our case, his brow furrowing as he examined the documents and photographs. "This is serious stuff," he said, tapping the file with a pen. "If what you're saying is true, we have grounds to reopen the investigation into Mark Thompson's death." "It is true," I affirmed, my voice steady. "Every word of it." The detective nodded, his expression grave. "All right, leave this with me, and I'll get the ball rolling." We left the station with a sense of anticipation thrumming through us. It was really happening. Sophie was finally going to face the music. But even as I felt a flicker of hope, there was still a nagging fear in the back of my mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if Sophie managed to slip through the cracks again? 2 days later, I received the call from Mark. "Turn on the news," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. I did as he said, my heart pounding as the anchor's face filled the screen. "Breaking news," she announced, her expression grave. "Local woman Sophie Thompson has been arrested in connection with the previously unsolved death of her ex-boyfriend Mark Thompson. New evidence has come to light, prompting police to reopen the investigation." I watched, transfixed, as they showed footage of Sophie being let out of her and Ryan's house in handcuffs. Her face was a mask of shock and anger, her perfectly composed world crumbling around her. Behind her, Ryan followed, looking stunned and lost. A fierce satisfaction burned in my chest. Sophie was finally getting what she deserved. But as the report went on, describing how Ryan had to use their savings to post Sophie's bail and hire a lawyer, I felt a pang of guilt. I had played a part in this. I had set the wheels in motion that had led to this moment. And now, Ryan was suffering because of it. Over the next few weeks, I watched from afar as the drama unfolded. Sophie's arrest made headlines, and the court of public opinion was merciless. Speculation ran rampant about her involvement in Mark Thompson's death, about what other secrets she might be hiding. Ryan put on a brave face, standing by his wife in public, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. He looked haggard, worn down by the constant scrutiny and whispers. A part of me yearned to reach out, to offer comfort and support, but I hardened my heart, reminding myself of the way he had cast me aside, the vicious words he had hurled at me. He had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. One afternoon, as I was returning from the grocery store, I spotted a familiar figure on my doorstep. It was Ryan. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, I considered ignoring him, pretending I wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked coldly as I approached, my arms laden with bags. Ryan looked up, his expression a mix of exhaustion and desperation. "Mom, I need your help." I raised an eyebrow, barely masking my surprise. "Oh, now you need my help. What happened to being done with me and my schemes?" He flinched, as if I had struck him. "I know I said some awful things, but this is bigger than that. Sophie's in real trouble, Mom. The evidence against her, it's bad." A flicker of unease passed through me. "What are you saying?" Ryan's voice broke as he spoke. "I'm saying I don't know what to do. The lawyer fees alone are bankrupting us. And if Sophie goes to prison, I can't raise the kids on my own. I need you, Mom. Please." I stared at him, torn between the urge to comfort him and the desire to lash out. He looked so broken, so defeated. But then I remembered the pain he had caused me, the way he had abandoned me when I needed him most. I straightened my spine, my voice like ice. "You should have thought of that before you turned your back on me." "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I need you. The kids need you." I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the son I had once known. The boy who had loved me, who had trusted me. But all I saw was a man who had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. "I'm sorry too, Ryan," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "But you're on your own." With that, I brushed past him, ignoring his pleas and apologies. He had made his choice. Now he would live with the fallout. A few days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Sophie's mother. Her voice was tight with barely contained anger. Linda, I know we've had our differences, but I need to ask a favor. The request caught me off guard. What kind of favor? It's the kids, she said, her voice faltering. With everything going on with Sophie's case, Ryan's struggling to keep up. He needs a break. I was hoping you could take the children for the weekend. I hesitated, torn between my lingering anger and the thought of spending time with my grandchildren. It had been so long since I'd seen them, and the idea of helping Ryan and Sophie after everything they'd done made my blood boil. But the thought of Emma and Lucas, innocent and caught in the middle of this mess, tugged at my heartstrings. Please, Linda, Sophie's mother pressed, as if sensing my reluctance. I know you love those kids. They need some stability right now, and Lord knows they won't get it from Ryan or Sophie. I sighed, my resolve crumbling. She was right. Whatever issues I had with their parents, my grandchildren were innocent in all of this. They deserved better. All right, I agreed, my voice firm. I'll take them for the weekend, but I'm doing this for them, not for Ryan or Sophie. Thank you, Linda, she said, relief evident in her voice. I'll let Ryan know to drop them off Friday evening. True to her word, Ryan arrived on my doorstep that Friday with the kids in tow. He looked even worse than the last time I'd seen him, his face gaunt and shadowed. Mom, he greeted me, his voice hoarse. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I nodded stiffly, my attention focused on the children. They looked up at me, their eyes wide and uncertain. Grandma. Emma cried, breaking into a smile as she rushed forward, wrapping her little arms around my waist. I hugged her back, blinking back sudden tears. Hello, sweetheart. I've missed you. Lucas was more reserved, hovering by Ryan's side. I knelt down, opening my arms. Come here, buddy. It's okay. Slowly he stepped into my embrace, his small body trembling. My heart ached for him, for both of them. Ryan cleared his throat. I'll pick them up Sunday evening. If anything comes up, just give me a call. I straightened, meeting his gaze coolly. We'll be fine. Enjoy your weekend. With a final nod, he left, leaving me alone with the kids. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. Who wants pizza for dinner? The weekend passed in a blur of laughter, games, and stories. For a little while, I was able to forget the drama and heartache, lost in the simple joy of being with my grandchildren. But all too soon, it was over. Ryan arrived to collect the kids, his expression guarded as they gathered their things. Grandma, can we come stay with you again soon? We had so much fun. Emma tugged on my hand, her eyes pleading. I smiled, smoothing her hair. Of course, honey. Anytime you want. Ryan's jaw tightened. We should get going. Say goodbye, kids. They hugged me tightly, their little faces sad. I watched as they climbed into Ryan's car, my heart heavy as he prepared to leave. But before he could go, he turned back to me. Listen, Mom, about what they said. I don't want you getting any ideas. This was a one-time thing. I bristled, anger sparking. Excuse me? You think I'm trying to turn them against you? It wouldn't be the first time, he muttered, his voice low. I saw red. How dare you? I have done nothing but love and support those children, which is more than I can say for you and Sophie. You're so wrapped up in your own drama, you can't even see how much they're hurting. Ryan's face flushed with anger. You have no idea what we're going through. No idea the stress, the pressure. And whose fault is that? I cut him off, my voice sharp. You chose this, Ryan. You chose Sophie and all the chaos that comes with her. Don't you dare put that on me. He stared at me, his eyes hard. This isn't over, Mom. I won't let you poison my kids against me the way you did with Dad. With that, he got in the car and drove away, leaving me shaking with rage and hurt. I stood there, watching until the car disappeared from view, a cold determination settling over me. If Ryan wanted to play hardball, then so be it. I was done playing nice. It was time to end this once and for all. The day of Sophie's trial arrived cold and gray. I dressed with care, choosing a somber black suit that radiated quiet authority. Grace picked me up, her face set with grim determination as we drove to the courthouse. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with tension. I nodded, my jaw tight. "I've been ready for a long time." We met Mark on the courthouse steps, his expression serious. "I've got a surprise for you," he said, leading us inside. I tracked down Mark Thompson's family. "They're here to testify." A surge of gratitude and vindication welled up inside me. With their testimony, Sophie's fate would be sealed. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. I took my seat behind the prosecutor's table, my heart pounding as Sophie was led in, her wrists and ankles shackled. She looked pale and drawn, but her eyes still glittered with malice when they met mine. Jake sat stiffly beside her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. I looked away, focusing on the judge as he called the court to order. The trial was a grueling, emotional affair. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with precision, each piece building on the last until the picture was clear. Sophie was guilty. As the trial dragged on, I could see Ryan growing more agitated, his knee bouncing, his hands clenched into fists. Finally, it was time for the verdict. The jury filed back in, their faces somber. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. In the matter of the state versus Sophie Thompson, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Sophie's face drained of color, her mouth falling open in shock. Jake leaped to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. "No," he shouted, his voice raw with anguish. I felt the wave of triumph wash over me, but it was accompanied by a hollow sort of sadness. It had come to this. My own son, broken and humiliated, his life in ruins. As Sophie was escorted out, she turned back, her eyes locking with mine. In that moment, I saw the depth of her hatred, the venom in her soul. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice low and deadly. "I'll make you pay for this. I swear it." I met her gaze steadily, unflinching. "You've already paid, Sophie. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences. Goodbye." As I walked out of the courthouse, pulling my coat tighter around me, I felt a strange sense of closure. Sophie was gone, her reign of terror over. But the victory was bittersweet. I had lost so much in the process. My son, my family, my peace of mind. It was time to move on, to build a new life for myself. A life without Ryan, without Sophie's toxic influence. A life of my own making. But as I stepped out into the cold, gray day, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie's parting words were a warning, a promise of more trouble to come. But I had faced down the worst of it, and I had survived. Whatever came next, I was ready.